Men and women are not equal. I know that might sound weird hearing me say that, but it is a reality and it's something that we absolutely need to dive into.
I have yet to hear of a woman recalling her experiences within sports that have not included some huge, profound negative impacts that she's experiencing decades later. Let's get into why that is.
Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Amelia. For today, episode 493, Why Sports Can Be Traumatizing for Women. I want to peel back the blanket. I want to peel back the curtains. I want to peel back this facade that I am so sick of hearing behind the scenes with a ton of clients in the Evolve community, and stories that we are now hearing finally come to surface that have been swept underneath the rug for so long. And so my intention for anyone that's joining us in this episode is to really get underneath why there are so many traumatic experiences that women, obviously that's going to be one of my focal points for today, but not just women, men have this too, but disproportionately speaking, women are negatively impacted and traumatized by sports. And there are some really gnarly things that are going on that I feel extremely compelled to talk about. And I hope that as you're joining us through this episode, number one, this can help you understand maybe what has happened to you that you haven't maybe had a safe space to acknowledge. Number two, to understand what we can do now as adults, as we're growing, for the community members that we look to. And most importantly, from my perspective, how we can become advocates for individuals who we love and care about, and reevaluate where they're at, why they might react in certain ways that they do as a result of the experiences that they might have had. So the reason why I want to bring this forward is because, Bianca, not only have I been an athlete my whole life, and I have personally experienced almost all of these statistics that we'll get into, but I was having a conversation with a client recently, and she's in her early 20s right now. And she and I were having a discussion about career goals and kind of just setting what does she want to do in her life. She's in that like really fun space in her life where the future is super bright. She has the world ahead of her, and she's constantly experiencing this like terror towards looking out towards the future. And that terror, as we look at what type of academic program she wants to get into. She wants to go back to school, all that happy jazz. She was explaining to me how she has this like inherent terror of looking at the future because right now feels like it's so still connected deeply into her past. And I find this actually in a lot of individuals. They can't even imagine building the future because there's so much gunk, for lack of better words, that is unprocessed from their past that is just getting in the way. It becomes the barrier for them to want to really envision a brighter future. And so I got into asking her, I said, every single time, we start talking about goals, I notice your energy shift. And I notice that there's a part of you that really wants to go in and talk about this stuff. But then there's another part that I'm noticing kind of shrink and collapse. And I asked her, I said, can we have a discussion about that? Are you noticing that? And she like looked down and she thought for like probably not an hour and a half, a minute and a half, just total silence. And I gave her that. And she's one of those clients who after like a minute of thinking, she really contemplates. She'll come up with the exact answer, not something that's dancing around or kind of like topical level. And she said, I'm realizing the terror that I'm experiencing and what you're seeing and what I'm noticing. Yeah, I do notice it. Every time I go to think about the future, and every time we talk about, the goals that I do want to work towards, every time we talk about what programs in school, I immediately get confronted with the job that I'm in right now. And I'm really fearful of having to share with them that I'm going to go back to school. And I'm like, okay, like understandable. What's underneath that? And she said, and I realize every single time that we talk about goals, it reminds me of all of the traumatic experiences that I've had during my sports career. And I was like, tell me more. Tell me more. And she then starts to unpack all of these experiences she's had, Bianca, in sports. Now, this woman's only lived 20 years in life, but she unpacked 10 plus years of her endeavors of sports where this woman is like terrified to even imagine the future because she doesn't want to have anything like it doesn't make sense logically, but emotionally we understand it. And essentially what she shared with me was that she went into sports, high level. She went into sports because she wanted to be an Olympian. She initially got into mountain biking, and that was her sport of choice. She got into mountain biking. Her dad had gotten into mountain biking, but she on her own accord, her dad had kind of hung up the medals and like not done anything. But she said to herself, and she told me, she's like, at 10 years old, I said, I'm going to be an Olympian athlete. And I'm like, okay, let's go. Like, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. And I'm like, that's amazing. Exactly. That's amazing. But you didn't see her really get excited about that. What you saw was just this slouch, this drop in demeanor, this total like almost starting to dissociate from the experience, because she said what started off as this really exciting journey of sport dragged me through some of the most traumatic experiences of my life, Amelia. And I was like, I had to like ground myself because I've heard so many stories about this. I've heard too many that I'd like to recount, and some of which are beyond words. And as I held space for her, kind of sharing what's happened to her through the sports and what she's experienced from a teammate level, what she's experienced from a power dynamic level with coaches, what she's experienced on a cultural level in that specific sport. So for anyone that's not aware, mountain biking specifically is predominantly a male-dominated sport. If you're a woman in that sport, you are likely having the set of experiences that she has, which is total ostracization. Women don't ride bikes, all this BS and misogyny that is embedded into the culture and the fabric of the sport. The women that do join in that sport, this is from her set of experiences, are needing, as a result of the first thing that I just said, needing that level of camaraderie between each other. But unfortunately, because it is so cutthroat, other women will sabotage other women. And she mentioned even to the extent of like physical violence and putting sticks in her spoke while she's going at a specific speed. Yep.
Oh
to try to like really hurt her. Yeah. Things that I've like never heard in that specific sport, but beyond what you can think, it's just. And I shared with her, it's understandable what you're going through. I am sure there's more stories to this. And then she started to get into the realm of punitive measures, sexual assault, the grooming components of her sports career and her athletic career. And after that session, Bianca, I had this just like, I need to brush myself up on some of the research, because I stay in touch with obviously female athletes and the data around that. And as of like the last 3 months, I have had, in a way, felt very compelled to revisit that research because of what my clients are going through. And I would just want to share a couple of stats before we go into some questions. Okay.
Before you dive in, I do just have a statement that I want to say.
Yeah.
We have a lot of male listeners. We have a lot of men who listen to the show. A lot of our clients are male. So I feel very pulled to say this because I've had male clients come to me and be like, it kind of sounds like you guys are bashing men. Like, are we just all terrible? So I want to say something, and I want to make something abundantly clear. This episode is not to say that these tragedies do not happen to men as well, because they do. Who's the, I'm blanking so hard on his name. Who's the famous swimmer, the male famous swimmer, like
Michael
most
Phelps.
winning Olympic, Michael Phelps. There's crazy stories of things that happened to Michael Phelps and like the mistreatment that he had gotten and how severely it impacted his mental health. So
Yes.
in this episode, we are not saying these things do not happen to men. What we are saying is some of the things that happen to women are happening in these very disproportionately larger amounts and in ways that it probably would not happen to men due to the fact that men do get more access to resources and whatnot than women do and that women have. So like women sabotaging each other in that way because women aren't allowed to be in certain sports wouldn't happen with men. Other things would probably happen, but things like that potentially would not. And if it did, to a much lesser degree. So I just wanted to make sure that I said that because this is not to put like men and women are against each other and we only care about women and F men, men are trash. Like that's that's not true. That's not real. We do not stand for that here.
Facts. And as a matter of fact, I'm really grateful for you sharing that because in this arena, she had at one point a male coach and he had the opportunity to do something about many of the levels of abuse that she was experiencing and actually was a perpetrator of that. And so I actually think any conversation about women cannot be had without having a conversation about the men and vice versa. And for all of the men that are listening to this, I want to invite you into this conversation from a standpoint of not just thinking about, because when conversations like these come up, it is shown that men experience this activating experience because they identify with a perpetrator, not necessarily with a victim of some of the things that we're going to talk about. And that's just so unfair to men because men experience these as well, to what you said, Bianca. The disproportional effect of reporting is on women. And why I mention that is because if you could imagine that the woman that I'm talking about in this is your daughter, is your mother, is your sister, is your aunt, is a really good friend, or is your partner, right? Or any of the women that you care about, you would shift your experience in how you're listening to this. And likewise, for anyone that's listening to this that is a woman, you're automatically going to identify with this woman's story because you have experienced statistically, just speaking on a statistical frame, you have likely experienced one of the following statistics. And I would wager that you have had very few people that you could talk to about this, including male counterparts. And so this isn't a conversation about men versus women and what their experience is solely in the traumatization during sports and throughout sports careers. It is far more about, like I said, how can we as a community, as a society, reduce, number one, these stats? How can we take a more advocating approach to the systemic challenges that are at play here? And how can we look at our friends left and right and recognize they've probably gone through some of this and you have no idea. This woman's 20 years old and she's never talked to anyone about her experiences. There are certain people that I have never talked to about my experiences. Like, this is not, it's not something that is getting enough spotlight. And if it does, it only is done so you'll see it in or at the Olympic level for a documentary. But this happens to all of us on every level. Because sports are not just for Olympians. Sports are for people who are in small communities. Sports are for people who love to get a competitive edge. Sports are interwoven with the educational systems that we have. I know here in the United States and countries around the world. So to that end, I want to read some of these. 21% of female athletes experience sexual abuse in sports. That is a rate at nearly double that of male athletes. 30% of women and female athletes experience unwanted sexual comments. 31.8% experience excessive punitive training. Punitive meaning harsher punishment, harsher treatment, higher bars that they have to hit in order to quote unquote get approval. Only 7% disclose the violent treatment that they experience within their career of their sports out of fear of reprisal or stigmatization. 10% experience physical beatings throughout their sports career. And girls are 1.5 times more likely to drop out of sports by the age of 14 years old than are males and male counterparts. So that's just some of the statistics. We could keep going. So why does this matter? I look at it from the standpoint of now that, Bianca, you and I are in our 30s, right? Like, well, you're about to be 30. You're about to join.
31, not
31, sorry, not about to join. You had 30 last year. But we're in our 30s,
Ma'am.
right? So we have a little bit of a different responsibility now, right? And I think that anyone joining this conversation, I want to encourage us to shift the vantage point from which we look at responsibility, because I see this as it is incredibly important to experience and be an athlete. There are statistics that show that women who are athletes and who are crushing it in their career attribute their ability to crush in their career to the competitive edge and the grit that they're developing within sports. Some of us now know why, right? When you experience that level of treatment, and that's just quote unquote normalized, of course you're going to quote unquote crush in your career. But that's not everyone's journey. So if we think about that, dropping out of sports by 14 years old, then what happens? The societal focus is away from your physical activities, away from sport. And what do people start doing after sport? I'll tell you what, it is not processing that trauma, because by 20, by 30, by 40 years old, I have people that are coming to me sharing stories that they've never shared with anyone, that have haunted them for their entire life, that have now led to chronic illnesses, mental health disorders, irreversible impacts on their body. Like the list goes on and on. So I want us to think about what can we do as a community to, like I said, attack the systemic challenges that are here. But more importantly, like if you're listening to this and you have impacted or you have been impacted by this, like let's open up that conversation. It's so freaking important, because at the end of the day, if we are not talking about these things, if we're not highlighting the roles and responsibilities that we have as this evolved community grows, and as I'm hearing more and more clients have children, this isn't even on the radar because we're not putting it on our radar. We're not acknowledging what has happened to us. So how the heck is it going to get better if we don't acknowledge what currently exists?
Why are women more susceptible to that? I think let's start at the most primal level. Like, why does that happen? What are the factors that have made that not a possibility, but a reality and an inevitability?
I don't want to say an inevitability, but definitely a reality. So one of the things that in my research that has come forward is, number one, when girls have lower rates of self-esteem, that makes them extremely susceptible and vulnerable to all of these statistics. Now, why do they have lower rates of self-esteem? Right? Because the opposite of that is self-confidence and resilience. Those are skills that are built only in the home. And I'm not saying they can only be built in the home, but where they start is in the home. Where that then gets built, like that's the foundation. So the biggest factor that is a component here is that parents are not focused on the realities of life. So if I were to gather 10 parents, right, and I were to ask them, like, you're so excited to have your child, like, I'm so excited for you. Now, how often are you looking at the statistics of what your child is going to go face just putting them in the school system, about the impacts of how them entering into sports or them entering into a specific AP calculus class, like, what is that actually going to do on their mental health? What is it likely to do? What is the probabilities that they're actually going to be negatively impacted and become a part of the statistics? I doubt any of those parents, maybe one, that's generous, would even have an awareness of what the statistics are that we just talked about, or any statistics thereof. So there's two things that I'm saying here. Number one, in the home, parents are not actively focused on developing strong and resilient levels of self-esteem and resiliency within children. Why is that not happening? Well, let me ask you this. How resilient and how high are parents' self-esteem levels, period? You cannot teach that which you don't embody. So then the second thing that I'm saying is, on top of that, parents are not looking at the statistics and raising their children informed from the data and the numbers. And this isn't to shame parents at all. This is just the realities that we're seeing. And so all those two things combined inherently predispose a child, a male, a woman, whomever, going into the seasons of life that they get exposure into. They become a part of the statistics or not as a result of the skills that they've developed at home and practice at home, and then practiced and developed outside, and then created a feedback loop at home to be able to talk about and improve upon.
There's also so many families and cultures that have substantial biases about what matters to them and what doesn't, and what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl, what it means to be in this culture, in this family, of this faith, whatever the case may be. Like, you and I have talked about this significantly. Growing up in my family, it didn't matter how good we were at sports. What mattered was, are you skinny? How do you look? What's your appearance look like? That, like, oh, you did good in sports? Cool. But, like, do you look good? And that mattered more than anything for me and my brother, and then my sister. So, like, when you're growing up in a home where the biases and the beliefs and the ideas and expectations of those, my camera's going crazy, the beliefs and the ideas of those around you are then being put on you, you're obviously going to lean in that direction, whether you want to or not.
You ever see that there's a great commercial, I think it was a commercial, but it ended up really circulating around media, and Evolvers, if you have seen this, comment down below on YouTube. We want to understand how much this has actually been circulated in this community. That it's essentially a kind of set up documentary style where the camera is just focused on a backdrop, and then there's a little girl just there, and the person behind the camera says, "What does it mean to run like a girl?" And then it shows like different little girls between, like, I want to say 6 and 12 to impersonate what it means to run like a girl. And there's multiple different little girls that are doing that. And I just saw the smile come across your face. So you've definitely seen it. So it's the socialization of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, what it means to be sporty, what it means to run like a girl. And you see a lot of these girls going like, as they get older, kind of pretend, not actually trying, but as they're younger, they are like actually applying themselves because they haven't been socialized out of that. To be sporty when you're young, you don't even realize to run means to run. There's no like a girl. The like a girl is socialization that is through your culture, through the family that you have, et cetera, at the primal level. When you are a young child, when you are a developing child, when you want to go to sports, is that something in your family is a pain in your parents' ass to bring you to all the practices, to make sure that you have your soccer gear or your shin guards or your hockey sticks or your tennis clubs or your whatever it is that a pain in your parents' ass? And do they openly express that? Or is that something where they're like, hell yeah, let's go get, like, they're so excited for you, right? Like that is absorbed internally and internalized. And likewise for boys, right? Like there's so much excitement for those quote unquote sporty activities. But then the camera flashes, what does it mean to run like a girl to little boys? And they're essentially making fun of girls. They're essentially making fun of quote unquote this run that is not actually a run. And so it really illuminates the stereotypical gender socialization that women are less than men and men are more strong than women. And it's just fascinating. Again, all of this, what I see is when not just women, because we are connected, when women are less and when women are impacted by like all these statistics, men are less too.
Yeah.
Men are impacted by this too. It is not something that happens in isolation. And there's certain cultures, this is something that my mother, my sister, and myself will kind of send. We have a group chat where there's certain cultures, I believe it's Scandinavian cultures, Nordic cultures, where to be a quote unquote woman and to be sporty, they're synonymous. Strength is something, physical strength is something that is actually valued, that is celebrated. If you're not building strength as a woman, or if you're not engaged with sports, then the harm is kind of done to the parents, quote unquote, not the child, because that is the parenting's downfall, if you will, because there's actual implications. And studies go, and I'll get off the soapbox in a second, but studies show that being sporty and being fit and being athletic and building strength, specifically muscle mass, that leads to better mental health, so long as you have the self-confidence and resilience that can move you forward through some of these challenges. It develops grit, it develops so many things. And then on top of that, increased muscle mass is going to encourage better everything from a health standpoint. So I see down the line, if your child is dropping out of sports before 14 years old in comparison to her male counterparts, and that's the stats right now, unless there's a correction, that inherently, and again, don't confuse causation with correlation or vice versa, but if we're looking at some of the stats, that essentially is like, that means lower abilities to have a healthy, happy, youthful, longevity life. Do we really want that? And that starts very, very young. So sports, yes, can be traumatizing for women, but now we look at this at a systemic level and we start to understand why. And the last thing my client had said, she said, when I was younger, I really looked to adults. I really thought adults were, had it all together. And my coaches, I really thought like they were going to shield me from some of this horrible stuff that happened, like from my teammates and from the boys that were doing mountain biking and the other teams that were shit talking me and the people that this, that, and the other thing. Like I really looked to them. And from this more adult perspective, now granted, she's 20 going on, 35 in her development, her cortical development. But she's like, from this adult perspective, I'm like wildly disappointed and I'm really hurt because adults saw these things and they did nothing. If anything, they did the opposite. So here's my rally cry to all of us as we are adults. You guys remember when you were younger, looking to adults thinking that they were so old and had everything together. You also were looking to them to protect you and to help you. For her, it was from where she started to become an Olympian. Ask me if she ever got there. The answer is no. And that is an atrocity in my mind, because not only has she not done that, but now if you look at her body, she's like stopped doing sports altogether and has an allergic reaction to physical training or any sort of exercise because it brings her back to those traumatic experiences. So she and I have a lot of work to do. If you're listening to this, I am so proud of you. And we have a lot of work to do. And we know that. We've talked about this. So, Bianca, thoughts on this? What do you think that we need to kind of close with for our listeners?
So I actually haven't seen the video that you're talking about, but I have seen a video. The reason I laughed is because there was this video going around and the caption was "Run like a girl." And it was these like 3 or 4 girls sprinting like 15 to 20 miles an hour on a treadmill.
Cool.
And it's like, run like a girl. Yeah, she's running 20 miles an hour. Like, what are you doing? So that's why I was smirking, because
Gotcha.
that video came to mind.
Mm.
Empowered women empower men, and empowered men empower women. This is not a male versus female debate. This is a, how do we as a collective society empower each other so that every single one of us has the safety, the security, and the opportunities that are out there for every single one of us. And so for us to be able to have it so that women feel safer to be in sports, to be competitive and not be called a bitch for it, or to thrive and strive, we need to all do what we can to ensure that happens. And a huge part of that is each and every single one of us working on the biases that we have. Like, I'm going to speak from firsthand experience here. I don't watch sports. I like engaging in sports, but I don't watch them. But like, back in the day, if I had certain partners or whatever, or family members, if they would watch the Super Bowl, like I would sit there and watch. I would not watch women's football. I just wouldn't. Back in the day, I wouldn't have. I don't watch sports at all now, but like, even me, I have an inherent bias. I'm like, that's dumb. So like, if even me saying that, like, we all have biases and I'm actively working on it. That's why I said it. We all have biases. We all have limitations. We all have narratives and ideas that we can work on, that we have to work on in order for us to allow not just women, but particularly women, because that's who we're talking about, but allow all of us to be able to evolve and grow and succeed. And the more that each of us as individuals succeed, the more that our society succeeds. The mental health stats will drop. Well-being will increase. Like, everything gets better when we get better. So developing resilience, developing those confidence skills, understanding your cognitive biases, understanding your judgments and your misconceptions. That's how we start. That's how every single one of us starts. Start with us. Let's start with ourselves. And we go from there. That's my final takeaway.
I love that. That's so powerful. My final takeaway for our listeners is to add to what Bianca said. Now I want you to take it into a practical realm. I want you to think about one person. I have the one person in mind. And I want you to take the statistics that I shared in this episode. And I want you to hold space whenever there is a conversation about sports that does get brought up. Because what I do know from being behind the scenes, pulling back the curtains, pulling back the covers, is that a lot of the avoidance of sports is because exposure to such has roots in our traumatic experiences. So hold space when there's a conversation of sports that come up. Recently, by the time this episode will have dropped, it will have been a month after. But, the Olympics just happened and there was an incredible feat of history in women's hockey and female ice skating and just in so many different categories. When the topic of sports is brought up, hold space, inquire about questions that are trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive, meaning that you take some of these statistics and you ask, hey, like, what was your experience like? Curious, compassionate, and calm questions about the people that you care about and their experiences. That goes a long way for creating safe spaces for our athletes, which, who knows, you doing that might just create the level of safety that gets them back into the thing that they loved doing. And we have the power to do that. Just did that with a client who's getting back into horseback riding. I'm so proud of her. So sport is a beautiful thing, and it is so inherent in our nature and built in our nature because there's a lot of community that's around that too. So Thank you so much for listening. Bianca and I both have the episode suggestion number 383, Simone Biles swears by therapy. Here's why you can too. We got into a deeper conversation around that. And as always, thank you so much for your interest in the science of holistic mental health and well-being. Keep evolving, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, everybody.